Hello, BookTube. All right, we're back for more Q&A. We're at Martha Kennedy Lindley. I think this is part 4. Well done on 11K viewers. My questions. Would you please do more starter kits? I always mean to do more starter kits. What do you think of Will Cuppy's writing style? I like it. It's light and froth. The Decline and Fall of Practically Everybody is a wonderful book. Uh, Alexander McCall Smith is so prolific. What do you think of his writing, and do you find one series better than another? I've never noticed a difference between the series. I know some of his fans have said that there are differences, but I like his writing. It's nice and smooth. I don't think he's quite the comic genius that his fans put him out to be, but they certainly are effortless reading. Uh, which do you prefer, the Hornblower books or the Master and Commander books? The Patrick O'Brien books. I hate to say it, it feels disloyal because I love the Hornblower too, but the Patrick O'Brien books are just better. I don't think there's much. I think I could defend that stance against a Hornblower fan. Uh, do you prefer reading serif or sans serif type for body type? No idea what you're talking about. What is your opinion of Margaret Craven's "I Heard the Owl Call My Name"? I like it. It doesn't really move me. It was the subject of a recurring joke for me forever and ever. When I worked in a bookstore one time, a customer came in and said, "I'm looking for a book." I said, "Okay, well, I'm ready. What's the book?" The customer said, "I heard the hoot owl call my name." And I didn't laugh at the customer, of course, because that was forbidden. I never did that, and I never allowed anybody else to do it either. I laughed at my coworkers plenty, but they weren't allowed to mock the customers. But I forever afterwards thought of the book as that. I heard the hoot owl call my name. Which of Chaim Potok's books do you think is his best? Probably I am Asher. My name is Asher Lev. The Asher Lev book, whatever the title is. Which book would you recommend for someone who has not read him before? Asher Lev or The Chosen, something like that. He's largely, his major works are largely interchangeably good, so you won't be lost no matter where you go. Would you please do a video or two recommending a biography for each president? There are so many to choose from. Well, that's my presidential library series, which has been stalled for years now. But that was what I did. I talked about them and then gave you a couple of biographies for each president. I think we got up to James Madison. We haven't gone far in the presidential library series. Have you always been an Oreo fan, or were you once a Hydrox fan? Personally, I found Hydrox's icing far superior to Oreos. Come to think of it, about their chocolate was better too. No, I've always been an Oreos fan. Beatrice Mendez has a gigantic swath of questions. Number 1, do any of our current subscribers or correspondents happen to be previous customers from your BNN days? As far as I know, no. Unless one of you wants to pipe up. I don't think any of my customers know that BookTube exists, much less that I still exist. Number 2, I would like to echo previous suggestions for you to do a starter kit of books on books. Duly noted. Number 3, would a live with Eric Carl Anderson be likely despite the difference? Time difference wouldn't be that bad. It takes 2 to do a live stream. He'd have to want to. Number 4, still thinking about your estimation of passionate readers to be around 100K worldwide. I want to think it's more than that, but have no facts to support my optimism. Maybe 1 million only in the US? That's 0.5% of the adult population. I'm just thinking of people who borrow books from libraries and people who buy books at bookstores and online, etc. I don't want to equate buying books to being passionate readers, but still, my local BNN checkout line would always be full of buyers. I would argue that your local BNN checkout line would not be, and that if you were to spend an hour there, you would see mostly that the registered people had nothing to do, especially now. But I'd be happy if my estimate were off. I'd be happy if there were 1 million readers in the world instead of 100,000. Number 5, speaking of buying books, do you ever buy new books? The fact that you can actually buy, the few that you can actually buy at Amazon. Every once in a blue moon, I will do a pre-order of a book just because it's the kind of thing that the publisher is not going to send me, but I do definitely want it. But it's very rare. And number 6, I thoroughly enjoy your channel, learn a ton from your videos, and I'm constantly inspired by you. Well, aren't you nice? Just wanted to thank you for your time and most of all your generosity. Oh, well, that's very sweet, but as I've said many times, it's not all that generous. I'm mostly doing this because I love it. I love to talk to all of you every day. Joel Swagman says, the late Christopher Hitchens and some others were of the opinion that Noam Chomsky wrote brilliantly about the Vietnam War, but then declined in quality in later years. What is your take? Were Chomsky's writings any good during the Vietnam War? Chomsky and I have a few beefs going back a long way, but his writing hasn't declined. It's a miracle, but it's, as far as I'm concerned, his writing hasn't declined. It's still methodical, has a kind of very somber eloquence to it, and is incredibly grounded. He wasn't dismissible even 50 years ago, and he's not dismissible now when he's like 150. Uh, let's see here. Jenny Parks says, how do you think a debate between Christopher Hitchens and Jordan Peterson would have gone, and would you have watched? I would certainly have watched. No idea how it would have gone. I think Hitchens would have been a pretty scathing critic of Jordan Peterson, and not for the quasi-religious fundamentalism that Peterson now works into virtually every comment that he makes about anything. I think Hitchens would have liked him for his pseudo-profundity, for his pompousness. His pomposity, I think, would have bothered Hitchens a lot. Because in Hitchens' world, only one person got to act that way, and it was Hitchens. So I think he would have done a lot of bubble piercing with Jordan Peterson. But then again, Jordan Peterson wouldn't have become a phenomenon if Christopher Hitchens were still alive. It would have been Hitchens who would have attracted these legions and legions of aimless 20-something men. It wouldn't have been Jordan Peterson. It would have been Hitchens who would have done that. The only reason that Jordan Peterson was able to fill that niche is because Hitchens wasn't there to do it himself, which could be a good or a bad thing. I have learned from personal experience what the young incels that worship Jordan Peterson are like. We're talking 20, 22, 23-year-olds who try to talk like Jordan Peterson, who is one of the most pompous speakers in the history of the world. And they end up sounding like weird nightmare homunculi, weird androids of Jordan Peterson. That's their failing. That's the way they're imitating their Messiah, is to be pompous jerks, condescending jerks themselves. And maybe that's a positive, because the way they would have imitated Hitchens is the way that people have imitated Hitchens even with him dead, which is to take up smoking. And I think, objectively speaking, that is worse, even than being pompous. That is worse. So who knows? But we're never going to see it. Let's see here. Joshua Long says, what are your thoughts on Steve Moore's The Novel and Alternate History? I like it. His books I love his books on the novels. Don't always agree with them, but I think they're fascinating. Any books or cultures that come to mind do you think he missed or misread? I can't think of any that he missed. I would disagree with some of his readings. I'm not sure I'd call them misreadings, but they're tremendously thought-provoking books. I think you're probably one of the few people on Earth that could critically comment on a work as wide-spanning as that. Now, there are a couple of others. Not many, now that Harold Bloom is gone, but there are a couple of others. But I appreciate it. Second question, what's your favorite Canadian author? You've mentioned you're generally not a fan of Atwood, but what about Canucks specifically float your boat? My favorite Canadian author, I think, would probably be Pierre Berton, and he doesn't write fiction about aunts checking timetables for trains. Finlay Miles says, only found your channel in the last few days, so this comes at a perfect time. Oh, welcome aboard. Many apologies if these have been asked before. Number one, is the Nobel Prize for Literature at all fit for purpose? Should there be one? What did you think of Bob Dylan's 2016 win? Yes, you are new around here, aren't you? I thought that Bob Dylan's 2016 win of the Nobel Prize for Literature was not only a desecration, but that it invalidated the Nobel Prize for Literature, not only in the future, but in the past as well. Look back at an author from 1940s who won a Pulitzer Prize in fiction. You can easily now say, yeah, but it doesn't mean anything, because later on they gave it to Dylan. They gave it to an illiterate cokehead who couldn't even read, much less write, the lyrics for which he got the world's most prestigious literary award. A ridiculous travesty designed only to command a news cycle. Okay. You want to trade the value and the reputation of your literary prize for a news cycle, go right ahead. And you did that, and now it's done. So who cares who wins the Nobel Prize for Literature now? If literally anybody can win it, then who cares? Number two, how can poetry be made more accessible for the wider public? Well, it could be better. Step number one to make it more accessible to the wider public is if it were a little better. Although we have read contemporary poetry on this channel that was quite good. So I think it's great that you have holdouts like the Atlantic or Harper's or the New Yorker that still run poetry. Magazines of general interest that still run poetry, assuming that there'll be people who want to read it. The TLS, the London Review of Books, the New York Review of Books, they all run poems. Original poems. It's a holdover from 70 years ago when people did read these things, but I'm all for it. And number three, who's your favorite president and why is it FDR? I'm afraid it's not FDR. Sorry. It'd be JFK. Nicholas Lassi Theotakis says, congratulations on 11K. I'm allowed 2 instigating questions and a serious one. Are you? You can ask any kind you want. Number 1, what did you think of Jordan Peterson as the Red Skull? Okay, those of you who don't know what Nicholas is talking about, recently the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates, who was given he was given the writing assignment for Marvel's Captain America comic book, only to attack the fans of the comic. Marvel Comics is deeply in the grip of an attitude that says it is a functioning philosophy of our publishing to attack our fans. We must belittle our fans. We must do what they hate. We must change a character, invent a storyline, add a writer or an artist, specifically because we know that a large majority of the people who keep the lights on in our business will hate this decision. And it's become locked in place. It's codified now. It's just a reflex that Marvel doesn't even think about anymore. They make their business decisions to antagonize their customer base, and bringing on, a flame-throwing race baiter like Ta-Nehisi Coates to Captain America. It wasn't an accident that they gave this book to him, knowing perfectly well what he would do with it, and he has desecrated it. I know that some people who don't read comics cite his run on Captain America as an epic run on the series. The people who've read the books, I have read some of these books, they're god-awful. Just awful. And recently, I firmly believe, is just a drug addict's desire to get attention. Recently, gave us an iteration of Captain America's age-old enemy, the Red Skull, in which the Red Skull is clearly positioned to be Jordan Peterson, with a book and a following of young men online and whatnot. Ta-Nehisi Coates was simply, literally vilifying Jordan Peterson as a comic book villain, simply because he has unedited control of a major comic. That's all. It's not for any other reason. I don't like Jordan Peterson at all. I would never compare him to a Nazi, to the Red Skull. And I don't believe that Coates thinks that he is either. Coates is just... he's made a very comfortable writing career out of very convincingly telling things that he knows are lies. And this, he knows perfectly well that Peterson can't sue him for it. But there aren't words for it. It is so scurrilous and childish and stupid and self-defeating. The tiny handful of fans who were willing to give that book some credit after years of it being desecrated are going to leave. The sales on Captain America are already terrible anyway. They're just going to get worse. It's a nightmare for me to think that this guy is going to direct a Superman, at least he's going to write a Superman movie. He only knows one trick. You know exactly what you're going to get from a Ta-Nehisi Coates Superman movie. I thought it was disgraceful, I guess, is the answer to your question. Then your next question. Have you gotten an advanced copy of John Green's book of essays? Does it continue the tradition of you liking the nonfiction of popular novelists you despise? Haven't got it yet, so I don't know. Could be. Although in his case, I'd find it harder to believe, because in most cases where I like the nonfiction of an author's fiction I don't like, at least I'm willing to admit, even with the fiction, that there's some talent there for writing. I've never seen any talent for writing that John Green has ever displayed in anything. So I don't know, unless he's deeply hiding it. It would surprise me. It would very much surprise me. And are you vegan? And if not, how do you reconcile contributing to factory farming with your sentiments about animal abuse? I am as vegan as I can be. I'm not authoritarian about it. If I'm someone's guest and they serve me meat, I will eat it rather than be a bad guest. But on my own, it's so easy to just have rice and broccoli. Just have a nice vegan stew. Just it's so easy to avoid. It's so easy to just have rice or potatoes that there's no need. So I don't have to reconcile it. Carolyn Nixon says, "Hello, Rudolfo." Said the other day in a video, but I really like the name Rudolfo. It's very sexy. Thank you. Could you talk about what has convinced you that reincarnation does not happen? There's so much that we don't know yet. How can you be certain either way? Okay, well, my number one reason why that convinced me that reincarnation doesn't happen is no one's ever proved it. And it would be easily provable. This is one psychic phenomenon that would be easy to prove, and no one's ever proved it. But in addition to that, when you say there's so much that we don't know yet, well, we know a lot, though. There might be stuff that we don't know, but we know a lot about how the human brain works. We know, for instance, you can't think without one. It's not possible to have a thought without a brain, whether you're a flea or a human. As far as we know, There is no such thing as a thought that can be generated in any other way. And when you're talking about reincarnation, you're talking about somehow the whole complex of a personality leaving the body, showing up somewhere else. And that means there has to be something that leaves the body upon death. You can't show that to me. That no one has ever proved that there is such a thing. That something does not exist. And it's the bedrock of reincarnation. If you don't have that something, then what's getting reincarnated? Nothing. Something in you has to go from one person in one era to another person in another era in order for reincarnation to happen. Well, then the first thing you would need to do to convince me that reincarnation is true is to prove to me that that something exists, and it doesn't. It doesn't. There's never been any shred of evidence for it in any way whatsoever in 17,000 years of looking. So I don't have much doubts on the subject. William S. says, what do you think of A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara? I liked it. It's a trip, as my generation used to say. But I liked it. I think it was beautiful and very effective in large parts. Julie Alvar says, number 1, I know you're a 28-year-old super hottie with raven hair, pillowy pecs, and bee-sting lips. Well, thank you. All true. But do you wear reading glasses? No. Number 2, how much of your youth did you spend in Iowa? Summers, visiting relatives, to provide a break from your sainted ma? I didn't really need a break from my sainted ma. Once we reconnected as adults, we were friends. We couldn't get enough of each other's company. I miss her. Still. I miss her. And not in the sort of dutiful ways that a lot of people just reflexively miss their mother. I miss my friend. I miss her still. But it wasn't just, I've never specified that it was my youth that I spent in Iowa. Could have been. Could not have been. There are rival schools of scholarship on that subject. Are you going to come up here and shake the camera? You are. But I spent a lot of time there, young and not so young, and loved it. Loved every minute of it. And number 3, I don't know I've ever heard you mention your father. What was your relation with him like? Well, I barely had a relationship with him. He died when I was very young. So I remember him. I got to hear him quite a bit. I could hear every word that was said in the house from anywhere where I was. But he was a stern and taciturn figure with his kids. Wasn't a best buddy type dad at all. So there weren't any opportunities. I had nothing that I recognized as an opportunity to really sit down and get to know him if he had lived. Like, for instance, if he'd lived as long as me sainted ma, then I firmly believe I would have become friends with both of them. I would have got to know both of them. It's just he didn't. That's probably the reason why I haven't mentioned him a whole lot. Oh, did you pull down the blanket? You did. God. That's the reason I probably haven't mentioned him, is because I didn't know him all that well. Rainbow Sky Gay and Proud says, first question, what advice would you give to gay men who don't write the stories they want to see and instead they censor them themselves or let homophobic people censor them? Because I remember you talking about how writers should write the stories they want to see. Well, that's true for anybody, gay or straight. If you're not seeing the kind of gay literature that you want, then write it. You could have a bestseller in your hands. There are plenty of examples of that. Second question, what do you think about the fetishization of gay men by women and the huge amount of excuses and justification that a lot of women will make when they are called out on it? I don't know the phenomenon you're talking about. Really don't know what you're talking about here. Question 3, what advice would you give to gay men who are feeling hopeless? Well, not just gay men, the same advice I would give to anyone. If you're feeling hopeless, the best possible advice, the best cure for boredom, the best cure for hopelessness, the best cure for feeling like there's no point to any of it, is to do something. Do something. Find a way, even in the middle of a pandemic, to volunteer, to help someone else. The way to get out of your own death spiral is to help someone else. That should be the one of the leading ethos of your life, should be to help someone else. Look outside of yourself and a lot of stuff will start to feel better. Trust me, it will. Last question, can you recommend 4 gay essayists that you like? I think I've had this question before, and I don't, no names come to mind. Not in terms of gay essays. I mean, there are plenty of really good essayists who are gay, but they don't necessarily write about gayness. So I, I don't know. I don't know that I have a ready answer to this. I feel like I'm letting the side down here. Jim's books, books, reading and stuff. I can't help it. I see the name and I can't help but do the gesture that he does on his channel. Books, reading and stuff. He's another booktuber. Very, very good channel. A lot of these people are booktubers. When do we see Steve Donoghue merch? Well, the problem with having merch on this channel, certainly I can come up with a whole bunch of ideas. Bookmarks, t-shirts, bean merchandise. I can come up with a whole bunch of ideas for such merch. I see certainly enough of it on booktube channels so that I come up with ideas. The problem is not thinking up an idea for the merch. And I gather that YouTube also has some sort of template involved for a merch store. You don't have to learn how to do that yourself. You can just plug it in to an existing merch store. I'm assuming that's true because a lot of channels that I've watched over the years that have merch stores are hosted by people who are barely have 2 IQ points to rub together. They certainly couldn't come up with a merch store on their own. I'm assuming there's an understructure, in other words, for this sort of thing. So the problem isn't that. The problem is that I would then be selling you stuff. Even if I never mentioned the merch, I would still be selling you stuff. Like there's a channel that I watch, a political commentary channel. Beau of the Fifth Column is the name of the channel. A Florida man, bearded Florida man. Like he always says on his channel, when you hear him talk, you immediately think he's a Trump supporter, and he's not. Instead, he's a rational actor. He's a thinker looks at the whole political spectrum, is willing to call an armed insurrection, but is willing to criticize anybody and praise anybody. Has a lot of really clear thinking. I love his channel, just love it. And for instance, his channel has a bunch of merch. You click on a video of his, you're going to see t-shirts and other stuff like that, some of the mottos from his channel. God knows we have plenty of those on this channel, but he never mentions it. He never hawks it on his channel. It's there if you want it. I guess I could do that. In which case, you're free to ignore it. I guess I could do that, and maybe that would work. So if I ever get off my duff to investigate it, then I would do that. Let's see here. Although I know that all the merch you'd want would be free to. Nobody would want any merch from me. But anyway, Shelf Life says, "What are your thoughts on Sam Harris?" Generally favorable. He's tending towards obscurantism and pomposity as he gets older, but everybody does, except me. Mike Cruz says, "Great work on the 11K community you have been developing." Couldn't do it without you, could I? Number 1, could you give a shout out to my 2 dogs, Magnus and Wolfgang? They are very good boys. I don't doubt it for a minute. Magnus is a 9 and a black lab, and Wolfgang is 7 and a lab Springer Spaniel mix. Magnus and Wolfgang, hello babies. I only wish that what I do with dogs, I do something with dogs. If you ever walk down a sidewalk with me, you will see it. It is unmistakable. Absolutely unmistakable. And it's not just that I love them. The thing you will see if you walk down a sidewalk with me is that they love me too. It has made many a friend over the decades that I have done this sort of say, "Whoa, what just happened here?" What just happened there? Unfortunately, that does not transmit through the camera, as far as I know. So Magnus and Wolfgang are not going to have any idea that I'm shouting them out. But if I were to come to your house, they would know. Give them a smooch for me. They are very good boys. Number 2, could you elaborate on your communication skills with our canine friends? I simply talk to them in their own collection of what I would call a language. Not entirely. I can't use, for instance, one of their primary methods of communicating with each other because there are laws against me urinating in public. But my sense of smell is a little bit better than normal for a human being, naturally, considering I've learned to pay attention to it a lot more than humans do. And I'm not a tobacco addict, so I'm not constantly ripping it to shreds. But also just their body language, the way they think. I'm not sure how much of it is transferable, but I learn a lot. I talk when the Bean and I are out on our walks. I'm face smooching and chatting with people all over the walk, just the whole length and breadth of it. This was very nice. It's a very nice change from the dogs I had. For instance, the 2 old dogs I had when I started this channel. I had my girls. I had a pointer, Malin, who was incredibly protective of my fat little basset hound, Lucy, and therefore didn't like other dogs. She didn't want anyone around Lucy. She didn't want anyone to come close to her. And she would snap. I never let her get close to other dogs, but that meant I couldn't get close to them either. Whereas Frida is a little bit on the bossy side. She's a little stiff, but perfectly friendly. She would never bite another dog, not even in aggression. She would never do it in a million years. Which means that I can meet all kinds of other dogs. The only kind of dog that she will actually read the riot act to are bouncy puppies. She can't stand that. It just can't stand that. They have to have a little bit of self-control. But if they do, I get to face smooch with everybody now. Because Frida's not going to object to that like Malin did. So that's wonderful. And your last question is, what are your thoughts on the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin? I like it. I think everybody does. Don't know anybody that doesn't like N.K. Jemisin. Balin321 says, long-time lurker here. My questions are as follows. Do we have time? We do. Number 1, what are your favorite European writers of the 21st century? Pfft, they all stink. Number 2, you rightly criticize the habit of navel-gazing among some young authors today. Do you think the current crop of young authors and the youth in general are truly the lesser sons of greater sires? Or do you think something else is happening? There's something else that's happening is that they have not been brought up short. They have not been made to realize that just overweening self-absorption is a dead end, that it's not going to be permissible in the outer world because, thanks to litigation and pressure groups and social correctness, it is now litigatable in the outside world. It is now something that you can demand. You can be hired by a company of 500 people and say, I am a young woman, but I want everyone in this company, even when I'm not around, in emails with each other, I want everyone in this company to refer to me as a young man or as a plural. I'm not an individual anymore. I want you to use plural pronouns with me. And I insist that you do it. And once upon a time, if a new employee had insisted that a 500-person company defy visible reality just because they want them to, they'd have been told, we're not going to do that, and you're not hired here. We're obviously not going to hire you. You could be somebody else's problem. Now the unbelievable self-absorption that has led to the kind of, what did you call it? Navel gazing of young people. That unbelievable self-absorption has now been litigated out into the real world. So there's no reason for it to go anywhere. So 21st century authors don't ever have to learn to look beyond themselves. They don't ever have to learn a craft, because if someone points out an error or an infelicity in something that they've written, that someone is a racist or a transphobe or sexist or Nazi. It's not that anything that I'm doing is wrong, ever. It's that I am now litigating my self-absorption everywhere. It always makes me wonder, what's going to happen when these people get old and start to die? What if they don't identify with being dead? And you go up to their gravestone. it's got life dates carved in it, or maybe just their birthday, because they don't identify with being dead, so they don't want anyone to carve a death date in there. And you look down at the grave and say, it's too bad you're dead. What, you're going to hear a ghostly voice saying, yikes, read the room. I don't want to think about it. Jeff Messerman, the name is vaguely familiar. 11K is the size of most cities in my home state of Wisconsin. Only if you include the Bears. Okay, you leave them out and you're in a top 5K at max. You are now comparable to a municipality, Donoghuville, population 11K. I know some people whose pictures would be on the wall of the post office in Donoghuville, if you know what I mean. But let's see what your questions are. Number 1, if a book has a stellar prose but shoddy plotting, do you still value it? And conversely, creaky prose but masterful storytelling. Yeah, they exist in a dance with each other. I'm perfectly willing to trade off one for the other. They both take work and a certain amount of skill. Sometimes I think I'm unrealistic to expect that a person who's mastered one can master another. I'm never happy about it. A lot of great authors can do both, but I will do it, definitely. And number 2, when in Sam Hill are you going to resume your radio duties here in Cedarburg, Wisconsin? We miss you terribly. I field 1 inquiry per week and have to lie and tell them you're currently working for the Sputnik radio service in Vladivostok and cannot be reached for further comment. We should work on it. We should definitely work on it. Some of you may remember what this Jeff Messerman character is drunkenly roiling on about here, which is for a brief time I did a podcast, a live thing for the Cedarburg Public Library, and I was honored to do it. But there were elements of it that just didn't work with my workflow. And there are ways around that if you would just pick up the phone. We could work on a way to make this happen in 2021. as distasteful as it is for me, we'll have to email about it. Let's see here. Matthew Hayes says, number one, where are you from? There's all sorts of scholarly disagreement about where I'm from. All sorts of different schools. Is it Nashua, New Hampshire? Is it Keokuk, Iowa? Is it a small town on the shores of the Black Sea in what is now known as Turkey? You won't find any scholarly agreement. Number two, why is Boston your favorite city? A number of different reasons. Mainly, it's the greatest city in the world. That's high up on the list. And number three, what are your thoughts on cannabis use while reading? Against it? Neutral? Like it? I can't like it because I would never do it. But wouldn't it ruin the reading experience? I mean, wouldn't you slow down to one page every day? I know the chemical effects of cannabis on the brain, and those effects are not conducive to reading. Music listening, maybe I could see, or movie watching, famously, but reading? Surely the higher you get, the worse a reader you would be. And I don't know, maybe that's not true, but I can't imagine it. Jerome Jacobson says, do you believe there was ever a real philosopher named Buddha? No idea. The historical veracity of Buddha as a figure in history? Not sure. Probably at some kernel there was, somewhere way down the line. Just like perhaps there's a kernel of Jesus, of a historical Jesus in that story. But God knows how you could find that person on the overlay of everything that's happened in the centuries since. The anti-Christian polemicist Aaron Ra did a really good video years and years ago. Aaron Ra did a video on the historical Jesus and made a point that the historical Jesus wouldn't recognize the Jesus that if he came forward in time, if he did exist and he came forward in time, he wouldn't recognize the Jesus that's being bandied about now. That's probably true for the Buddha as well. Tyler Curtis says, you've often lamented the corruption of your, quote, beloved Republican Party. I have never called the Republican Party my beloved Republican Party. When was the last time you felt proud of or at least respected the GOP? A large part of the 20th century. It wasn't until they embraced the Southern strategy, and that meant we're going to semi-codify racism as an organizing platform of the party, and that was kind of the beginning of the end, although you could still find totally respectable, ethical, upstanding Republican national figures. That just started deteriorating as their base of readers frittered away or aged into Democratic votership, and they refused to change with the times. And then it took off ballistically with Newt Gingrich. And now it is at the lowest point that it's ever been. And I'm not saying that's not an opinion on my part. That is, in the 2020 Republican convention, for the first time, there was no Republican platform either put forward or amended. Instead, the Republican platform in 2020 was whatever Donald Trump wants. Literally, one man, one rule. Donald Trump is the party. He is our platform. Anything that he tweets at 3 a.m. in all caps is fine by us, and anything that he condemns at 3 a.m. in all caps is something that we hate, no matter what it is. So you had previously upstanding Republican national figures being confronted by reporters and saying, okay, well, we just saw film footage of children with no parents hugging each other under tinfoil blankets on concrete floors in concentration camps at the southern border, orchestrated for and pushed for by Donald Trump and his larcenous children and whatever Stephen Miller is. You're a Republican. He's the leader of your party. Do you agree with this? You had formerly ethical people, who claimed John McCain was their friend, saying, yeah, absolutely, whatever Donald Trump wants. I don't want him to primary. I don't want him to call me a bad name on Twitter. So whatever he wants. Identity cards, asshole countries, concentration camps on the southern border, opening up your gut to shine a sunlight lamp on it or whatever he says, I'm for it. To the point where the one or two elected Republicans who didn't do that were ostracized by their own party. So it's been a steady decline, but the early part of the first half of the 20th century, you had plenty of upstanding Republicans who would who would have had a conscience. Who you had plenty of upstanding elected Republicans who would have said, "What? No, the party platform is a whole bunch of beliefs that we share and caucus for and will work for our representatives, for the people we represent. It's not the opinions of one addled 70-year-old. It's we have a platform. We have a series of beliefs. In 2020, that went out the window. The Republican Party's platform is Donald Trump right now. They haven't amended it. They haven't said, well, I don't know what we were thinking. They didn't change their mind when Donald Trump incited a violent insurrection to breach the Capitol, execute his own vice president, overturn a lawful election, and establish himself as an unelected leader. They didn't change their opinion then either and say maybe we should have a platform. Didn't do anything like that. So now it's the lowest that it's ever seen. I don't believe there really is a Republican Party anymore. There's a Trump Party. So it's been a while. It's been a while. Although there are lights in the darkness. I'm not the world's biggest fan of my former governor, Mitt Romney, but at least he was willing to say, all right, well, I was willing to go along with a whole bunch of crap, but this is too much. This is just cartoonishly evil. So although I'm not a Democrat and will never caucus with the Democrats, I'm obviously against all of this crap. Anyone would be against all of this crap. And look at the abuse he's got for it. So there aren't many, but there are still some. And then Jennifer Madden, how are we doing for? Oh, we're out of time. Oh my! Oh, but we're also out of questions. Jennifer Madden's question is the last one. All right, we'll squeeze this in. This will be a long video. Hi, Steve and the Bean. My question: do you think it's okay for fiction authors to review fiction books on BookTube? Is this frowned upon in professional circles? Frowned upon? No, it's become a lamentable habit for book section editors to find a novelist to review a novelist. Should never have taken hold. It's a terrible idea. Just terrible for all the obvious reasons. But no, excuse me, it's the rule, not the exception now. I've seen some well-known authors share their positive star ratings on Goodreads, so perhaps sharing only positive opinions on YouTube would not be so very taboo. I'm very much in favor of authors just staying out of this whole thing. As I've said on this whole reviewer space question, there's a very broad line between an author promoting their work and an author promoting themselves. And when you get down into the trenches of reviews, oh look, I've got 4-star reviews. I can understand how desperate you would be, especially if you're a self-published author. But a little more self-control, a little more reserve than that will go a long way. I think I see a lot of very unprofessional behavior on the part of authors, both traditional and self-published these days, and I don't like it at all. It doesn't do them any credit. But anyway, I'm gonna wrap this up. This is a long video. I just want to end by thanking you. Of course, I want to thank you not only for all these great questions, which are so delightful, but for 11K subscribers. That in itself is amazing. So I'm gonna wrap this up, and then I will post. God knows how long these things will take to post. It's not raining anyway. When it's raining, my Wi-Fi just lays down for a nap. But I should be able to get these up by tonight. But anyway, thank you very much, BookTube, and I'll see you soon.